This is the gospel of Jesus Christ according to Luke, the 18th chapter. Then Jesus told them a parable about their need to pray always and not to lose heart. He said, "In a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor had respect for people. In that city there was a widow who kept coming to him and saying, 'Grant me justice against my opponent.' For a while he refused, but later he said to himself, 'Though I fear no God and have no respect for anyone, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will grant her justice, so that she may not wear me out by continually coming.' And the Lord said, 'Listen to what the unjust judge says. And will God not grant justice to his chosen ones who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long in helping them? I tell you, he will quickly grant them justice. And yet, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?'" It's the gospel of our Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Parables are tricky. There is the point they are trying to make, but there's all the other stuff in the imagery that isn't part of the point. Someone once suggested that teaching a parable is like pointing to a cat's food while the cat just looks at your finger. The Good Samaritan is not a parable about being prepared for bandits as you travel on the road. The prodigal son is not a parable about making better investments with your inheritance. And the parable that we just read, the unjust judge, is not an analog for the behavior of God. This is a parable about the value of persisting in prayer in the face of prolonged and equally persistent injustice. We would have to ignore really large bits of the gospel message if we would think God was the perpetrator of that injustice. In this parable, it is the persistent cry for justice that is an analog for prayer. The one to whom she is crying, that's where the parable no longer serves the point. The judge is not God. If anything, the judge is the world that continues to deny justice in the persistent cries of the faithful. The question to this answer is then, why should we persist? If those in power do not fear God or respect people, what use is there in continually going to them with these demands? For those of you old enough to remember Emmett Till, why would his mother ask for an open casket? Her son's body had been brutally disfigured by people who believed the color of his skin made him less than human. They did not fear God as they murdered him. They did not respect his humanity. And they were still using their power to ensure that they could do it again. What good is there in going one more time and looking at him? What good is there in going to God one more time and saying, "Look what is happening among your children"? Jesus seems to be saying that sometimes even an unjust world will bend just a little. The pictures of Emmett Till's body did not end racism or even lynchings in this country. His murderers were never even sent to prison. In fact, they were paid handsomely for sharing their story of how they did it. Mamie Till, his mother, never got to hold her boy again. For all intents and purposes, the world was just as evil the day after that funeral as it was the day before. The tears of those gathered were one more cry of "Grant me justice" in an unyielding world. But the world did bend a little bit that day. Most view Emmett Till's funeral and the published pictures of his open casket as an inflection point in the civil rights movement. Thousands of moderate whites who believed that the violence against blacks was exaggerated were now convinced of the reality of the situation. Even those who remained committed to the cause of white supremacy, they responded like the unjust judge in this parable, afraid that they would be worn down, realizing that they could not be quite as blatant in their violence and their denial of the humanity of the people they encounter. If that unjust world bent at the cries of a mother's grief, imagine how God, who loves her as a child, heard those cries. That's the point of this parable. This is not an example of how God hears prayers. This is a comparison between how the world and how God hears our cries for justice. The world is still large and broken, and like a giant ship slow to turn, God hears and responds quickly to every one of our cries for justice. We do not persist in our prayers because God didn't hear them the first time. We persist because maybe, just maybe, the universe will bend ever so slightly towards justice. We do not persist in hopes of changing God's will. We persist out of faith that the world is changing in accordance with God's mercy and justice. Our prayers do not enact that change. They enable us to participate in it. Our persistent expectation of the efficacy of our prayers just may wear down even the most stubbornly unjust aspects of our world. And that can, like Emmett Till's funeral, mean macro scale, socio-political forces like racism, sexism, classism, nationalism, or any other ism that perverts justice. And it is the church's call on a macro scale to stand with the victims of those injustices. When the unjust say they are tired of hearing it, they are about to be worn down, it is the church's call to go one more time and shout, "Grant me justice." Our faith should let us know that even those mountains can be made low, but that injustice can also be. Very personal tragedies of a mother and a son that may not or may be unjust in and of themselves, but are always still part of the brokenness, the sin and hurt of this world. Our prayers remain persistent in the face of sickness and death, in the face of broken relationships in which neither party is obviously at fault and both are hurting, in the face of the rising cost of living that makes it more difficult for our children and our grandchildren to carve out any semblance of financial security, in the face of the tears of a stranger we pass on the street or our own as yet unrealized aspirations, in the face of all the turmoils and changes of life as the church shifts and adapts its methods of serving one another, her prayers remain constant. The church's cries for the world to reflect honestly God's justice back at us remain constant, while the rest of history moves on like time-lapse footage. It's not the decision of the unjust judge that is the point. Oh, we do pray that may we please live to see changes, small triumphs in which our cries for justice become shouts of thanksgiving. But that's not the point of the parable. The woman's persistence is the point. That would have had purpose regardless of the judge's actions. Her returning every single day, despite an unchanging reaction from the judge. That's the point. Her coming back every day and naming what is broken would have had value whether or not she lived to see it repaired. It is the persistence of her prayers that matters. our faith is that God is establishing a just and holy world that is coming, with or without our prayers, but that our prayers are part of it. May that trust be kindled in us, that God's promises are being realized so that when the Son of Man returns, he may find us faithfully coming once again to the injustices of the world, even if we cannot name our opponents, and demanding one more time, grant me justice.